We're gonna try and check in on the Iran saga, see what's going on with Iran since the last time we talked yesterday. I don't really think I've heard much. This was the only video that I found with any like new sounding information. It says breaking, Iran leaves Pakistan before U.S. arrival. So it sounds like Iran is maybe taking um, you know stepping away from negotiations, or like not attending now. So let's see what this video is all about.
We do have a bit of breaking news that I want to bring to you here on Live Now as we've been discussing.
One sec, sorry, I'm trying to make sure this, maybe I need to speak a little closer to this microphone. I think the volume might be a little bit low. I don't know, which way does this go? Maybe this way. Testing. Sorry about this, people. Okay. I think that might be a little bit louder. I don't know. I'm trying. My microphone, I don't really know exactly how it works in terms of its volume. I think that I could maybe scale it up on OBS. I might try to do that while this video is playing. But let me start over here. Let's go.
We do have a bit of breaking news that I want to bring to you here on Live Now as we've been discussing the very latest, anticipating the two U.S. envoys leaving here from the United States and heading over to Iran for some of those conversations as it pertains to the conflict. But this is the breaking news we do have from the Associated Press putting out there now that Iran's foreign minister, who was there in Pakistan, has now officially left Islamabad, without meeting with U.S. envoys. Of course, we do know that it was Jared Kushner, President Trump's son-in-law, alongside his envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, who were set to have this meeting. But again, Iran's foreign minister, breaking news, has now left Pakistan without meeting with those U.S. envoys. And so to talk about this breaking news and a lot more that has to do with this situation, I now want to bring into the conversation here with the Middle East Institute, Ross Harrison. Ross, thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now from Fox.
Of course, Christina.
Well, this is the news that we had been waiting to see how all of this would unfold. This next round of talks, highly talked about, highly anticipated. It was never officially cemented, but we just got the announcement yesterday from the White House that they were going to be sending these two envoys.
Okay, I added some gain to it, so I'm hoping that that gets it in like a better spot, depending on where I'm sitting in relation to, so I think it should be a little bit louder now.
But now it's official that Iran's foreign minister deciding to leave Pakistan without meeting with them.
Yeah, I think it's significant, Christina, in the sense that this whole set of circumstances, both the Foreign Minister Aghashi leaving Islamabad prior to the arrival of the two American negotiators, the maintenance of the blockade that you just heard about from the Secretary of Defense and from the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, or from the head of CENTCOM, the maintenance of the closing of the Strait, or the continuation of the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. It's all part of a major bargaining process that's going on here. And I think what's significant from the Iranian perspective is that it tells the Americans that they are not desperate for negotiations. And that's what the rhetoric has been coming from the White House over the last number of weeks, is that the Iranians want a deal, they're begging for a deal. And I think what this signals is that the Iranians are not desperate for a deal. And so we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing America can do about this. Iran fundamentally does not need a deal as much as America needs a deal. Like these are just these are facts. Like I mean, you can, if you buy America's spin, then you would think that that this blockade somehow changes like everything, right? All of the failures that happened before the war are gone. We now have the blockade. The blockade is, the ultimate, ultimate secret weapon, hidden jutsu that that America was holding on to, and they finally did it. And now everything is different. Everything has changed. The reality of the matter is the blockade does not change anything. It is. It puts a small amount of pressure on Iran, but it puts a shit ton of pressure on America and the rest of the world. Like I said at the beginning, there's a reason that America decided to unsanction Iranian oil, and it was because America needs that oil on the market to keep all of its vassals, all of its vassalized countries happy. If that oil is not on the market, then that puts a lot of pressure on those countries. You know, they're going to start having rolling blackouts in East Asia and in you know, in Europe. And you know, Western countries in particular don't do good when they don't have all of the conveniences that they you know, feel like they deserve as being, I don't know, a superior civilization or whatever goes through their brains. So you know, I think that like it's not it just fundamentally this whole blockade situation puts way more pressure on America than it does on Iran. And so I don't know. I really don't know what America is going to do at this point, to be honest. There's nothing. If they would have a lot more, they would be in a lot better strategic position if they had removed the blockade when the foreign minister said that they were opening up the waterways to all ships. But they didn't do that, so now America just has an immense amount of pressure on it from trying to do this. And that's assuming, by the way, that there's not a whole bunch of shadow fleet vessels going through, which I do think there are. I don't think it's possible for America to stop all of the ships going through the strait. That would require you know, a whole bunch more a whole bunch more Navy assets in the region, I think, to do that.
It's disappointing, but I don't think it's completely surprising as well as either.
Absolutely. And so we have that tweet up there from the Associated Press detailing that he left as of Saturday evening. We do know that Iran, I should say Pakistan is quite a few hours ahead of us. But ultimately, I want to go back to what we were anticipating to happen today when the U.S. made the announcement that Kushner and Witkoff were supposed to be headed there to Pakistan to engage in some of these face-to-face talks. Why were those two chosen in this moment? And do you think that that was part of the reason that Iran's foreign minister decided to step away without meeting them?
Well, it's possible, though I think it was anticipated that President Trump would send Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner because they were there actually 2 weeks ago, along with Vice President Vance, for the negotiations that also included the head of the Majlis, the Speaker of the Majlis, the Parliament, Ghalibaf. So I think that was expected. I think what is significant here, and it might have been a signal to the Iranians, is that they're sending two negotiators, but with very little experience on the nuclear issues that would have to be discussed and would have to be negotiated, and very little under.
For those unaware, Witkoff and Kushner, I think, were the ones who were tasked with negotiating with Iran before the hot war started, right? So I can't remember what date that was, but like when they were actually negotiating. But and Iran gave them everything in the world on a silver platter, like everything America could have hoped and dreamed, like the best deal, like I mean, from an American imperialist perspective, by the way, like the best deal they could have ever possibly wanted. Like all getting rid of like most of their enriched uranium, you know, like being hugely conciliatory to you know, the various like potentially even I can't remember what all they offered. But I just know that it was like I know that at least with the nuclear stuff, it was like every like way better than the JCPOA, right? But they said no. The Kushner and Witkoff, they said no to it, and then that led us to this. Now they were always going to say no because America fundamentally didn't want a deal. Like they wanted war for Israel's sake. So like Kushner and Witkoff, I've heard people say that they just didn't know what Iran was offering. I mean, maybe, but like they are idiots. But I also think that primarily they were like just doing what Israel wanted. Everybody was playing their parts to do what Israel wanted, to get America drawn into you know, a war of choice with Iran. So yeah, I don't know. It is like, I think, insulting to send those two probably at this point to negotiate with Iran. Also, every time that they send people, they have to call Trump a million times. They're not like given the authority to make decisions and stuff, as opposed to like the Iranian delegation, which like they send it and then they're given the authority to make decisions at the meeting. And then when they come back, maybe there might be some disagreements on those decisions, but they are, there's like a fundamental difference in, like, I think the capabilities when it comes to negotiating. And I think that that's probably why they want, like, someone more serious, at the very least a JD Vance type, to be there, probably. But yeah, I don't know if that's exactly why they didn't show up or what, but who knows.
Understanding and experience with Iran. What's unusual is not the fact that they did not that the U.S. did not send two experienced diplomats, because oftentimes diplomats are not necessarily the best negotiators. If you think in the past, you think about James Baker, who was George H.W. Bush's Secretary of State, and go back even further, President Nixon's Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. They were not experienced diplomats. They were consummate negotiators. But what they did have that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner apparently do not have is that they brought with them the bench strength and the expertise on the issues that were going to be negotiated. So typically you want to have a strong negotiating team, either professional diplomats or non-diplomats, and you want to have the kind of backup that these negotiators would need in order to actually advance towards some kind of either framework agreement or some kind of statement of principles, and then ultimately towards a finalized agreement.
Absolutely. And of course, we're seeing some of the video footage from when JD Vance was actually a part of that delegation that went over to Pakistan to have some of these conversations face to face. And so that's kind of where I want to take it next, Ross. What is the significance of having a sit down conversation with some of these leaders when you're talking about negotiations, seeing that sit down won't happen today? But is there some sort of way to move forward between Iran and the U.S., maybe from a distance and not necessarily face to face?
Well, remember, I think what negotiations typically entail is they entail discussions about how to move from kinetic military action into some kind of actually a diplomatic off ramp that would allow the parties to slowly disengage. And what I would expect is that the signaling going into a negotiation.
I mean, traditionally, yes, but not in this case. America can't end this war on its terms. There's nothing it can do about it. So there is a fundamental disagreement that is going to happen, no matter what. In this sort of, like, I just don't I don't see any end to this conflict being possible that doesn't end with America, taking a huge fat L on the world stage. The only thing would be if they just, like, unilaterally disengage. But even if America just unilaterally disengages, like, leaves all the sanctions, leaves all that sort of stuff, but just unilaterally disengages, well, that just means, okay, Iran does control the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, Iran is the regional hegemon. Okay, Iran can destroy all of the bases in the region anytime it feels like, like, I don't know. There's nothing, like. And also, like, if Israel ever attacks again, Iran is going to hit them back, like, a million times harder. And America might be less willing to get drawn in again. So I feel like everything, no matter what America does, I'd say, like, America's best, like, from its own perspective, probably best situation would be to just unilaterally disengage. Like, from like a traditional, like, imperial perspective, like, in terms of maintaining America's hegemony. I think that taking, the fat L that's required to be taken in this particular circumstance to actually end this, like, conflict for good, like, as in, like, Iran, is has sanctions relief, but maybe reduces some of its nuclear capabilities from 60%, or enrichment from 60 down to 20 or something, with maybe some Western groups coming in to investigate them. Like, I just don't, I feel like that would be too much of a L probably for America to take. So I don't know. I just don't, they're just on two completely different wavelengths. And I just don't think that it's going to be possible to for them to actually come to any sort of negotiated settlement here, personally.
Signaling from both sides should be that both parties want to de-escalate. And I think the problem we have here, Christina, is that the signaling is not strong. The Iranians are basically claiming that the strait is still closed, and the United States is saying the time is on, the U.S. side; it's not on the Iranian side, and that the blockade will continue. Those are not necessarily the right signals you want to send. You want to basically send the signals that each side, sequentially or simultaneously, would slowly start to de-escalate, not fully de-escalate. Because remember, going into a negotiation, both sides need to feel that they've got a certain amount of compression.
That's you can't do that with Trump, dude. That's not how Trump works. That's not how like late stage fascist America works. Every de-escalation will be seen as capitulation to America. So if you give any sign of goodwill, like for instance, the foreign minister saying that, oh, we're going to open up the strait to like all shipping as opposed to just the ones that we want. America saw that as a capitulation, and so they doubled down on blockading, which then led to a re-escalation on both sides. It doesn't work in this particular circumstance, what he's saying here, as a, both sides slowly de-escalating. It just can't work when you have people with as much like when you have a hegemon that is has been so like humiliated on the world stage with how little it was able to achieve militarily, right? Like when you have a flailing hegemon like that you can't really operate like you normally would in terms of de-escalating a conflict. Not until the situations get like incredibly, like the material conditions get incredibly bad for that hegemon and they're forced to acknowledge reality.
Or a certain amount of pressure on the other side. So you don't want to necessarily completely de-escalate, but you want to basically send the signals of de-escalation. And those signals have not been sent. And that's why this negotiation was problematic, is that both parties seem to believe that they had more to gain by maintaining the status quo than by basically pursuing an off-ramp.
I'm glad that we're able to kind of.
I don't know if Trump actually believes that. He might, but I think that that's just kind of projection, right? That's just kind of what he's trying to like put like propaganda, like what he's trying to put out into the world to try and get people to try to believe that he somehow has more cards than Iran does in this circumstance, which they don't.
Break down exactly possibly what was going on behind the scenes there as well. I do want to read this new update from the Associated Press saying that 2 Pakistani officials were the ones who confirmed to the Associated Press that the Iranian foreign minister did leave the country without meeting those U.S. officials. It was those same senior Pakistani officials who were at the airport near Islamabad to see the foreign minister off. Those 2 spoke under the condition of anonymity because they're not authorized to speak to the media, I should say. We do know that the foreign minister, though, during his time in Pakistan, did take the time to meet with other leaders there in the country. I want to ask you now, Ross, how significant is it that the conversations, again, are happening outside of the 2? The conversations are happening with Pakistan and Iran, and the difference between that with the U.S. also engaging with Pakistan.
Well, I think it's significant that Pakistan is trying to enhance their global role. I mean, they have a global stage at this point, and they are not a protagonist of the conflict itself. Remember, Oman and Qatar in the past have played that role, but both of them have been involved in this conflict, have been recipients and targets of Iranian missiles. The other thing that I think is significant here, Christina, is that in terms of the negotiation, is that to look at how each of the party sort of looks at the risks of escalation and de-escalation. And I think for Iran, and this might have been part of the calculus of Foreign Minister Aghashi leaving prematurely before the U.S. negotiators actually arrived at Islamabad, and that is that for the Iranian perspective, in some ways, they have more to risk by de-escalating than escalating. Because if they de-escalate, they risk 2 things. One is that it would be construed by the United States as weakness, and therefore, when they would get to a negotiation, that they would be exploited, and that the U.S. team would believe, particularly with
it already has the even just accepting the ceasefire was interpreted as capitulation. So yeah, I mean that's just how America is going to interpret it. They were probably in a technically better position for like making negotiations during the hot war, but the problem is it's really hard to actually negotiate settlements like during an active conflict. So to some extent, they were always going to have to engage in some sort of ceasefire. But yeah, the like America is just like America is behaving like someone in the weakest position they have ever been in, which to an extent America is in the weakest position that it has ever been in. And so that's how it's behaving. And when you're that unconfident with yourself, like with your position, then you really like especially like you're going to over project and like uh like overcompensate, right? For the weakness that you are like of the reality that you are actually in.
Without Iran experts. They would believe that the Iranians were weak and they would push for more concessions. And the other thing that the Iranians would risk is the loss of deterrence. And remember, one of the objectives the Iranians have going into this conflict or coming out of this conflict, one of the things they need is to reestablish deterrence. Going into this conflict, they didn't have deterrence. They need to reestablish it. So if they go down the escalation ladder prematurely, they risk actually losing deterrence or leaving this conflict without deterrence. So in some ways, the Iranians have more to risk by de-escalating than escalating. If they escalate, yeah, they're certainly going to take some hits from the U.S. and they may even burn through some more equity with the Gulf Arab states. But at the end of the day, their calculus will be they will have reestablished deterrence because they would have reinforced the fact they can inflict pain. On the United States side, in some ways, it's the opposite, because the United
Yeah, I don't disagree with that assessment. I think that is the case. And I think that, like Iran doesn't want to be seen as the aggressor in any way. So they're not going to unilaterally start re-escalating the situation. They're going to wait for America to do an escalation before they retaliate, but they will retaliate strongly when America does. I think that America is likely to escalate at some point, just given the amount of troops that are in the region, but I don't know when that's going to be. It wasn't this weekend, so maybe next weekend. I don't know, but we'll see.
United States is threatening to escalate further, but the question is, what kind of goal could they actually be achieving? Because if the goal is to get the Iranian regime to show more flexibility or be more pliable, the past has shown that that actually stiffens the resolve of the Iranians, doesn't weaken the resolve. And if the president would de-escalate prematurely, and then that strengthens the Iranians' hands in the negotiation, then there's a risk that perhaps a deal would be no better than what was achieved under Barack Obama's administration. So this whole
And we can't have that. That's the main reason that he wants something better. If Obama just hadn't gotten that deal, I feel like Trump would have taken like any of these deals so far. But he has to somehow show that he is better than Obama. So one sec, my cat's being bad.
whole negotiation piece really ties closely with what kind of messaging is being sent on the battlefield, if you will.
And Ross, so how do we think that President Trump may respond to all of this? I'm sure there's going to be a Truth Social post where he's going to kind of respond to these reports that the foreign minister left before the envoys were able to have a sit-down conversation. What approach do you think that he will take? And do you likely think that whatever that approach is going to affect how the Iranians respond to us?
There you go.
Christina, I'm much better at predicting what the Iranians are going to do than I predict what Donald Trump would do. But I think if you look at the options that might be available to President Trump, it would be, he possibly could escalate further, try to break the status quo, because what the Iranians are doing is they're saying, okay, you have a blockade against us, we're going to keep the straits closed. And he could try to use kinetic action to break the blockade or to break the closure of the strait in some way. We don't know.
There's no way to do that. There's no way to break the blockade of the strait. Iran just needs one missile or one gunboat. That's all they need to close it in its entirety. So there's nothing America can do about that.
I mean, ideally, what would happen by both parties is through some kind of back channel conversations, there would be an agreement to both parties would slowly de-escalate. So Iran would agree to reopen the strait. And that, by the way, that was something that happened 2 weeks ago today, I believe, or maybe 2 weeks ago yesterday. When the ceasefire was announced, the Iranians immediately said, we're going to open the straits. And then the U.S. side said, well, they can reopen the straits, but we're going to maintain the blockade. And then that caused the Iranians to basically say, okay, well, the straits now closed. It wasn't confusion on the Iranian side. I think it was the need from their perspective to create or maintain some form of escalation dominance. So I think ideally what would happen now, Christina, is that both sides back channel with signal to each other that each of them can slowly de-escalate, and that would be the right milieu or environment to then go into some form of negotiation. But what's actually going to happen from the U.S. side, if I say something and I'm wrong 5 minutes from now, then it would have been worthless. So I'll just say that there's options available, but how the U.S. is going to respond and how President Trump's going to respond is anybody's guess.
All right, and so we'll keep our eyes there on social media as President Trump typically does make some of those announcements on Truth Social with his response to things, or if he has press gaggles and is able to answer some questions from reporters, we'll also make sure to bring that to folks. And so, Ross, as we're sort of rounding out this conversation, you and I had anticipated talking maybe about something a little different, talking more about the fact that 21 hours was the last sit-down conversation that the two had. But with this breaking news, seeing that Iran's foreign minister has now left, any parting thoughts that you have as far as how these things are continuing to move forward? Also, that maybe the American people need to be paying a bit more attention to in the next few hours and days.
Well, I think it's important to understand, Christina, that you're dealing with a middle power. Iran is not a superpower. The U.S. is a superpower. So I think we have to at least understand, not necessarily agree with, not necessarily buy into the Iranian logic, but the Iranian logic basically is that if they leave this war.
Well, they're a middle power, but they're a regional, like, they have shown themselves to essentially be the regional hegemon. Like, nobody can contend with them. Like, none of the Gulf states can contend with Iran. Iran has the strategic asset of being able to close the Strait of Hormuz whenever they want. Like, nobody can stop them from doing that. Like, Israel can't stop them from doing anything. Like, they have shown themselves to essentially be the regional hegemon at this point. And that was something that wasn't the case before this war started, but is going to be the case going forward. I would not say that they are a global superpower. I agree with him on that. But they are becoming, like, more and more strong, and like like, they are emerging much more strong than they were before the war, I would say, and they are potentially going to continue growing their, like, regional hegemony in the future, depending on especially the outcomes of this conflict.
A war that they did not start. They leave this war not having reestablished deterrence, something that they believe they lost in the last war, which was June of 2025. If they leave this war without deterrence, then they're going to be vulnerable again. And to be vulnerable to a superpower, the United States, and a regional military superpower, Israel. And that the U.S. is a superpower. So if any party can.
I mean, Israel is like a military, like, powerhouse in that, like, they have all of the advanced tech of America, but they're just an extension of America. And Iran can escalate with them tit for tat easy. Israel would be decimated in a one-on-one confrontation with Iran, right? Like, Israel would be decimated. They would not be able to survive that. Like, without without American, troops being in the region, without American, ships being out there shooting missile interceptors 24/7, without America's, billions upon billions of my tax dollars being sent to them, like, without all of this stuff, and without all of our interceptors also being siphoned over there, like, without all of that, Israel would not be able to in any way compete with Iran. Even with all that, they are just like peers potentially. With Iran, with Iran having superiority in that Iran can produce missiles way faster than Israel and America can produce missile interceptors. So, like, in a long-term conflict, like, Iran definitely wins that conflict. So, like, I don't know. I think that we like, if you don't think of Israel as just an extension of America, then I think you're really, like, misunderstanding the point. Like, Israel is about as strong, like, in the region as, like, uh like as Iran, maybe with all of America's help, but that still doesn't mean that they would ever win a conflict, like a direct conflict with Iran. The only difference obviously is like the nuclear option. Um which even that I don't think Israel, even if Israel deployed like all of their nukes, I don't think that they would still be able to defeat Iran. So I don't know. I think that like sometimes I feel like they overestimate Israel's actual like military dominance. Like yes, Israel is really good at militarily dominating civilian populace, like civilian populations around them, for sure, 100%. Um, they're good at militarily dominating all of the various countries that we have like eviscerated and like have essentially set up like Western puppet governments that are essentially just helping Israel colonize their country slowly but surely. Yes, of course. They are good at dominating civilian populations and like killing children and shit. I'm not going to deny that anybody like I don't think anyone in the world can could compete with Israel when it comes to killing civilians. I think they are by far the best at it. But when it comes to actually going against like pure adversaries like Iran, which, like I said, Iran is a pure adversary to America. Like, I think that I don't think that they would stand a chance. So, yeah.
Actually start to de-escalate and send the signals that the next negotiation is going to be a real negotiation. It's not going to be, we're going to sit down and dictate terms to you, but it'll be a real negotiation based upon the bargaining leverage that each side has. I think the U.S. can do that. And I think how that plays back in Washington and politically, I think there is room for the United States and for President Trump to de-escalate and still basically send the message to the American people that he gained something. Because I think the Iranians are willing to negotiate on the nuclear enrichment front. They're not going to give up their right to enrichment, but they're willing to negotiate a suspension of enrichment for a certain period of time. So I think really in many ways, if there's a desire, if the American people want this conflict to end, then there needs to be an understanding that you're dealing with an asymmetric conflict with the United States being a superpower and a middle power like Iran, basically needing at the end of this day to try to forestall this kind of an attack happening again. And that therefore there needs to be some kind of understanding of that on the part of the United States, and that there needs to be a willingness to show dignity to or give dignity to the Iranian position, not agree with it, negotiate hard, but at least understand that they cannot be dictated to and end this conflict having gained something that they can move forward with. So I think that the asymmetry between the U.S. bargaining position and the Iranian bargaining is important, something important that the American people need to understand.
I like how you put that. The asymmetry between the two countries, still something to pay attention to as the hours now move on, knowing that that sit-down meeting is likely not happening today as Iran's foreign minister has officially left Pakistan. And so I do want to thank once again Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute and author of the new book, Decoding Iran's Foreign Policy, Ross Harrison, for joining us once again here.
Okay, well, there you go.